Stop. Police. Stop or I'll shoot. I repeat, stop or I'll shoot. I won't say it again.
The sound of the gunshot was deafening. In a dark alley, Officer Ryan Carter pulled the trigger without thinking twice. The bullet flew toward Marcus Thompson, a man Carter saw as just another gang member, another problem to eliminate. But what happened next left the officer frozen. The bullet, which should have pierced his chest, bounced off with force, deflecting as it hit what appeared to be a bulletproof vest beneath his worn clothes. Carter couldn't believe what he was seeing. The gang member was far more than he appeared. To understand how they got to this moment, we need to go back a few hours. Marcus Thompson was in the middle of a mission that had taken him months to prepare for. At 35, he was one of the CIA's most efficient agents. It wasn't just his physical ability which was impressive, standing 1.90 meters tall with a body trained to endure the harshest conditions, but also his intelligence. He had been through it all, from undercover operations in drug cartels to missions abroad that would never be made public. But this time, he was on much more familiar ground, the streets of a neighborhood controlled by one of Los Angeles's most dangerous gangs. Still not subscribed? Do it quickly, it's just one click. Now, let's get back to the story. For weeks, Marcus had been infiltrating Los Reyes, a gang that, under the guise of being just a small-time drug operation, was involved in an international network of narcotics and weapons trafficking. His mission, to dismantle the organization from within and sever its ties to larger cartels in Latin America. But to do so, Marcus had to assume a dangerous identity, a false life in which no one could know who he really was. From the outside, no one would have suspected that Marcus was anything more than another gang member. His clothes were tattered, his beard unkempt, and he wore fake tattoos covering his arms, symbols that marked his loyalty to the gang. Even his walk had changed. Now he walked with the swagger of someone who feared neither the law nor death. He had earned the trust of the leaders, but he knew that any wrong move could cost him his life. On that particular day, Marcus was supposed to meet one of the gang leaders in an alley, away from prying eyes. Everything seemed under control, until Officer Carter showed up. Ryan Carter was a police officer whose career had been marked by racial tensions and a dangerous mindset. He believed that justice had to be applied with an iron fist, especially in neighborhoods where, in his eyes, the law didn't reach effectively. But what really drove him was prejudice. He had seen Marcus wandering through the alley and didn't need much more to decide that this man, this gang member, needed to be stopped or, even better, eliminated. Carter had been patrolling that part of the city for years. To him, it was a never-ending war against gangs, and over time, the line between protecting and punishing had blurred. Seeing Marcus, a black man with a dangerous appearance in a dark place, was enough to trigger all the biases he held within. "Stop! Hands up!" Carter had shouted, aiming his gun. But Marcus couldn't stop. He couldn't risk being discovered, so he kept walking. He knew he was in a life-or-death situation, but his training told him to stay calm. Carter, blinded by fear and prejudice, didn't hesitate. The shot rang out, echoing off the alley walls. And that's when everything changed. The bullet, which Carter expected to end Marcus's life, struck something unexpected, the bulletproof vest Marcus wore under his clothes. Marcus fell back, but quickly stood up again. The pain was intense, but he had been trained to endure far worse. He stood there, staring at Carter with a calmness that contrasted with the confusion flooding the officer's face. In that moment, Carter realized something didn't add up. A common gang member wouldn't wear a bulletproof vest, let alone react with such composure. However, before he could process what was happening, Marcus did the only thing he could: run. Before we continue with this surprising story, make sure to subscribe and give the video a like so you don't miss more content like this. Marcus knew he had to get out of there quickly, but he also needed to handle the situation carefully. He couldn't let Carter follow him, nor could the gang find out what had happened. All his work could collapse with one single mistake. Despite being hurt, he managed to disappear into the shadows of the neighborhood, blending into the darkness of the night, while Carter, still in shock, stayed behind, unable to process what he had just witnessed. This wouldn't be their last confrontation, and both of them knew it. Marcus ran through the shadows, feeling the weight of the bulletproof vest pressing against his chest, the spot where the bullet had struck burning, but he knew the pain was much less than it could have been had he not been prepared. The CIA training had prepared him for extreme situations, and although his body was tense, his mind remained focused. The streets of Los Angeles were a labyrinth he knew well, and his skills at evading pursuit kicked in immediately. He couldn't let Carter follow him, but he also couldn't draw too much attention from the gang. Every step he took reminded him of the mission. Infiltrating Los Reyes had been one of the most delicate operations of his career. He had barely earned their trust, and any slip-up would endanger not just his life, but the entire case the CIA had built around this dangerous organization. For weeks, he had been gathering evidence, names, and details that could bring down the cartel's operations. But now, with Carter hot on his trail, everything was at risk. As Marcus ventured deeper into the heart of the neighborhood, his thoughts turned to what he needed to do next. He couldn't afford to be discovered by Los Reyes as an undercover agent, let alone be caught by the police. He needed to contact his team, but doing so at that moment was too risky. His top priority was to lose Carter and then return to the mission as if nothing had happened. That was the only way to survive and keep the operation alive. Carter, on the other hand, was confused and stunned. The shot he had fired with such certainty had not had the expected effect, and now he began to wonder who the man he had tried to stop really was. The image of the gang member he had fixed in his mind didn't align with what he had just witnessed. There was something more to him, something that didn't fit with the stereotypes he had always relied on. The officer couldn't stand idly by. He called for backup on the radio, but for some reason, he felt he needed to handle this on his own. If it was an undercover operation or something bigger, involving too many people could complicate things. He didn't know who Marcus was, but he knew one thing: he couldn't let him disappear into the night. He had to catch him or at least find out what was going on. Haven't left a comment yet? Do it quickly, my friend. I want to know your thoughts on this story. Meanwhile, Marcus found a small hideout in one of the abandoned buildings the gang often used. It wasn't the first time he had taken shelter there, and he knew he couldn't stay long, but he needed a few minutes to think. The building's walls were covered in graffiti, and the air smelled of mold and decay, an improvised refuge where violence and despair had left their mark. He pulled out his phone from a hidden pocket and, with trembling hands, dialed a number only a few people knew. The call was quick, and his message was clear: "I've been compromised, but they still don't know who I am. I need a clean exit. No more interference." The other side of the line was silent for a moment before a calm voice responded: "Hold your position. Avoid the police at all costs. We can't risk the operation." It was the CIA, his only hope of getting out of this situation without months of work collapsing. But the orders were clear: he couldn't let the police catch him. He had to carry on as if everything was under control. With a plan in mind, Marcus knew what he had to do. The first part was to leave the hideout without being detected. Then, he had to make sure the gang didn't suspect anything. The worst thing that could happen at that moment was for someone in the gang to start questioning his loyalty. Just as he was about to leave, he heard something. Footsteps. Someone was close. Quickly, he crouched down and moved silently toward a corner of the building. From there, he saw a familiar figure. Carter had followed him. The officer was closer than Marcus had anticipated. Now everything depended on how he played his cards. Carter was searching for him with the intent to arrest him, but Marcus knew he couldn't allow that to happen. However, confronting him directly wasn't a viable option either. Any confrontation would attract the gang's attention, and his cover would be blown. He knew he had to think fast. He looked around and saw a back door slightly ajar. If he could move carefully, he could avoid Carter and slip out unnoticed, but every second that passed brought him closer to danger. Carter kept moving forward, nervous, his hand firmly on his gun. The situation had become much more complicated than he had anticipated, and he was beginning to question his decision to act alone. Despite everything, something inside him told him not to involve more officers, at least not until he fully understood the situation. Marcus, on the other hand, knew his only option was to stay in the shadows, using his training to blend into the environment, silent, invisible. The problem was that any misstep could end everything. Time was running out, and they both knew it. Just as Marcus was about to make his next move, a sound broke the silence. The main door of the building swung open. Two members of Los Reyes entered, talking to each other. Marcus held his breath. Now he not only had to avoid Carter but also his own comrades in the gang, who wouldn't hesitate to kill him if they discovered he was an infiltrator. The game had just become much more dangerous. If you're enjoying the story, give it a good like. It's as quick as the bullet that hit Marcus. Time seemed to stand still. Marcus, motionless in the darkness, watched as the two gang members ventured further into the building. Their coarse, carefree voices filled the air as they slowly approached. They had arrived there by chance, looking for a place to smoke or chat about some minor matter. But for Marcus, their presence meant a mortal threat. Carter, unaware of the gang members' movements, continued searching the building, cautiously moving forward, gun in hand, ready for anything. The officer still believed Marcus was just another gang member, one more in a long history of men he thought needed to be controlled by force. He couldn't imagine how complex Marcus's world truly was, nor how delicate the operation he was involved in was. Marcus knew he didn't have much time. If the gang members saw him near Carter, they might suspect him. If Carter found him first, the situation could escalate and spiral out of control. Each actor in this situation played a crucial role, and Marcus was trapped in the middle of it all. As the two gang members laughed and talked loudly, Marcus began to slowly inch his way toward the back exit. Every step was precise, ensuring he made no noise, attracting no attention. The bulletproof vest, which had saved his life just moments earlier, now felt like a heavy burden, a constant reminder of how close he'd come to the end. Carter, positioned on the opposite side of the building, heard the gang members' voices and stopped. His police instincts told him something more was happening. This area was known as the epicenter of illegal activity, and finding members of Los Reyes here wasn't surprising. But what about the man he had shot? Something didn't add up. He decided to move toward the voices, hoping to understand the situation better and, with any luck, catch Marcus in the process. Suddenly, Marcus heard something that made him freeze. One of the gang members had mentioned his name. His alias, of course, but still, hearing his fake name in that situation unnerved him. El Flaco wants to see Terrence, one of the men said. El Flaco was one of the gang's leaders, a dangerous man Marcus had been working closely with in recent days. The fact that they were looking for him meant something bigger was unfolding within the gang. Marcus knew he had to get out of there fast, but now with a new concern. El Flaco was looking for him, and that could only mean one thing. His mission was reaching a critical point, and any wrong move could blow his cover. The situation was becoming more complicated by the second, and Marcus needed to think quickly. But just as he was about to slip through the back door, Carter suddenly appeared, rounding the corner with his gun pointed directly at him. "Stop! Don't move!" Carter shouted, his voice firm but tinged with confusion. Marcus slowly raised his hands, calculating each movement. He knew a confrontation here could trigger a chain of events that would destroy all his hard work. If Los Reyes saw him with a police officer, they'd immediately become suspicious. But how could he escape without causing a direct confrontation? "Officer, you don't know what you're getting yourself into," Marcus said in a calm yet urgent voice. "I'm not who you think I am." Carter frowned, keeping his gun trained on Marcus. None of this made sense to him. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered a criminal trying to talk their way out of trouble. But there was something in Marcus's eyes that gave him pause. Still, he wasn't about to let this man walk away just like that. "You have the right to remain silent," Carter began, reciting the standard Miranda rights. But before he could finish, a noise behind him interrupted. The gang members had realized what was happening. They saw Carter pointing his gun at Marcus and, without hesitation, drew their own weapons. To them, the only thing that mattered was that one of their own was in danger, and police were never welcome on their turf. "Hey, what the hell are you doing, cop?" one of them shouted, aiming his gun at Carter. Chaos erupted in an instant. Marcus seized the distraction to move. In one swift motion, he dove behind a nearby pile of rubble, seeking cover. He knew he had to act fast. While Carter turned to deal with the gang members, Marcus escaped, dodging bullets that now flew in every direction. The situation had escalated dramatically within seconds. Carter found himself caught in the middle of a firefight with the gang members, and though his first instinct was to defend himself, he quickly realized he was outnumbered. The sound of gunfire echoed off the walls of the old building as Carter hit the ground, trying to shield himself. But there weren't many options for him. He could only attempt to stay under cover. As Marcus kept moving, staying low and out of sight, he understood that this had become a race against time. The delicate balance he had maintained for weeks was on the verge of collapsing. If Carter didn't get killed in the crossfire, he might come after him again. And if Los Reyes started suspecting him, it wouldn't be long before his cover was blown. Every decision Marcus made in the next few moments would determine whether he lived or died, and whether the entire operation succeeded or failed. From his hidden position, Marcus watched the scene unfold. He knew he could let everything play out, escape, and continue his mission. But he also knew that leaving Carter there would mean the end for the officer. And no matter how full of prejudice Carter was, letting him die wasn't an option for Marcus. His training and his morals wouldn't allow him to abandon someone, even an enemy. "Damn it," Marcus muttered to himself as his mind raced through every possibility. He took a deep breath and in a swift movement, ran toward the exit while the gang members were distracted by Carter. But he didn't leave entirely. Once he reached a safe distance from the building, Marcus pulled out his phone again and dialed an emergency number, speaking in code, "Operation in danger. Black Coat. Officer injured in action. I need an intervention." He knew the CIA would respond, but now there was a new variable in the equation: Ryan Carter. The operation had gone from a simple infiltration to a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. Night was falling heavily over the neighborhood, and the echoes of gunfire still resonated in the distance. Marcus walked away from the chaos, but he couldn't just leave it all behind. He knew the situation had spiraled out of control, and what had started as a perfectly calculated undercover mission now hung by a thread. Walking through the dark streets, his mind was split between two thoughts: the mission and Carter. He could have left Carter to die in that building, but something inside him, beyond his training, beyond the CIA's orders, had stopped him. Carter was an officer, yes, but more than that, he was a human being, someone caught in a situation he didn't fully understand. Marcus knew that, sooner or later, he would have to face the consequences of what had happened. He couldn't let the gang members know he had saved a cop, but he also couldn't let Carter discover everything. The balance was fragile. A few hours later, Marcus found himself in a small motel room on the outskirts of the neighborhood. There, under a dim light, he did the only thing he could at that moment: wait. He knew the CIA wouldn't take long to intervene. The black code call he had made was a signal that the operation was in danger and that he needed a quick extraction. The problem now was how to wrap everything up without leaving any loose ends. Carter, meanwhile, was recovering from the shootout. Despite the confusion, he had managed to get out of the building alive, thanks to the distraction Marcus had created. By the time the police reinforcements arrived, it was already too late. The gang members had fled, and Carter had no idea what had really happened. All he knew was that the gang member he had been chasing wasn't what he seemed. Something bigger was happening, something that didn't fit into Carter's simplistic view of things. At the police station, Carter sat at his desk, unable to shake the image of what he had witnessed that night. The man he had shot hadn't just survived, he had helped him. It didn't make sense. For years, Carter had patrolled those neighborhoods, seeing the worst society had to offer. But that night, he had seen something different. He couldn't get the image of Marcus out of his mind, standing up from the ground as if nothing had happened, as if he were prepared for that kind of situation. It was impossible that he was just a gang member. In the midst of his confusion, a call came through on his phone. It was his boss. "Carter, there's something you need to know." The voice on the other end was serious, almost nervous. "The man you shot, he's not who you think he is." Carter was silent for a moment. The information he was about to receive would change everything he thought he knew. Marcus wasn't a gang member. In a few words, they explained that he was involved in a high-level operation. CIA. The acronym echoed in his mind like a bomb. Everything clicked into place, but it only raised more questions. What the hell was the CIA doing in my district? Carter asked, but he didn't get any clear answers. He was only told to stay out of whatever was happening, to leave it to the higher-ups. But Carter wasn't the kind of man who backed down easily. Not when he had been dragged into something that had nearly gotten him killed. He couldn't just step aside. Meanwhile, at the motel, Marcus finally received the call he had been waiting for. His superior at the CIA, a man he only knew as Donovan, gave him clear instructions: "You need to disappear. The operation has become unsustainable. Carter knows too much, and the gang members are starting to get suspicious. We can't risk you any further." Marcus sighed. He had known this moment would come, but he had hoped to close the mission before things got so complicated. The CIA wasn't willing to expend more resources on an agent who had been too exposed. The extraction would be in 1 hour. He would have to leave everything behind, cut all ties with Los Reyes, and vanish without a trace. However, Marcus couldn't leave without ensuring one more thing. He knew Carter wouldn't stop digging on his own, and that could jeopardize not only him but the entire operation. Before leaving, he had to find the officer and make it clear that his interference wouldn't be well received by the wrong people. It was a risk, but Marcus couldn't afford for Carter to keep investigating on his own. He headed toward the police station, slipping through the shadows of the city, just as he had done so many times before. This would be his last mission in Los Angeles. Carter, sitting in his office, was not ready for what was coming. A call from reception informed him that someone was waiting for him outside. Marcos. Carter recognized him instantly, even through the security cameras. The man he had shot. The man who had escaped. When they stood face to face, Carter didn't know what to say. Marcus, wasting no time, looked him directly in the eyes and spoke in a low voice. "This goes beyond you, Carter. You have no idea what you're getting yourself into. If you keep investigating, you'll put more lives at risk than you can imagine." Carter, confused and frustrated, couldn't hold back. "Who the hell are you? Why is the CIA involved in this? Why did you shoot at me?" Marcus stared at him in silence for a few seconds. He knew he couldn't reveal the truth. The CIA had its rules, and he had followed them to the letter throughout his career. But Carter was in the middle of it all. If he kept pushing, he would end up destroying years of work. "I'm not your enemy, Carter. But if you keep digging, I will be. This is bigger than both of us. Let it go." Carter, furious and confused, watched as Marcus walked away, knowing this would be their final encounter. He couldn't just let him go that easily, but he also knew there was something darker behind all of this. It wasn't just a man trying to save his life. It was an entire world of secrets that Carter would never fully understand. Marcus disappeared into the night, knowing that his mission in Los Angeles had ended, but that the weight of what had happened would stay with him forever. End of the story. Thank you for sticking around until the end. What did you think? If you'd like to hear more stories like this, don't forget to subscribe and leave your comments. See you next time.